Welcome to Inside South Union Township here on the South Union Township Network. Inside South Union Township is brought to you as a joint cooperative venture featuring Township Supervisors Bob Schiffbauer, Rick Vernon, and Jason Scott, Atlantic Broadband Cable, Armstrong Cable, and our friends at CUTV, including Gary Smith. We're continuing our coronavirus program series here today, and joining us, Jim Davis from Davis & Davis, Attorneys at Law. Jim, nice to have you along with us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
And certainly some crazy times going on right now, and you look at the major health impact that COVID-19 and coronavirus has had, and maybe in the long run, the economic impact might be even greater.
Well, to my way of looking at it, the health impact is by far the most serious issue, and how we handle that as a nation will far outweigh the economic impact. Why do I say that? If people are dying from this virus, and we can do something to prevent that from happening, slow that process down, save some lives, that has to be primary in our minds. That has to be the most important thing that we can do. As far as the economic impact, anything we can do to lessen that, we should do, but not at the expense of human life. I say that because everything I've read and everything I've studied on pandemics in the past, we have recovered. Nations have recovered. Their economies have recovered. It may have taken a while. There was some suffering. So I feel like where we are right now, we're focused on the health of our people, health of our nation, and from there, we're going to work on the economic recovery. And hats off to our legislators and senators and other government officials for some of the things that they have done to try to help us from the economic side of this problem.
And this certainly is an event that we've not seen before in our lifetimes whatsoever. And we talked about the response that we've seen from a federal level and some of the programs that have already been passed, starting first with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act.
Well, yeah, and you know, really, and that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about the legal side of this thing, to the extent that there has been legislation that's been passed, the impact of that legislation, what we understand all this to mean. Obviously, I'm not qualified to talk about the health side of all this. I'm like everyone else. I'm nervous, and I'm listening, and I'm going to follow the advice of the medical professionals.
And like both of us are very involved with small businesses in the community, and I know a lot of small businesses have reached out to you and have talked to me as well. I think it's really hurting everybody right now.
Oh my God, it's been a dramatic impact on small businesses. Just think about it for a moment. The mom and pop stores, the small family-owned restaurants, they're shuttered. What can they do? What little they can do would be in the takeout realm for food, and that can't sustain them. So you wonder how some of these small businesses are going to survive. And we're hopeful that some of the legislation that's come through will help them to survive. Again, a lot of that's going to depend on how long this pandemic lasts, the overall effect of it, how long we're going to have to stay shuttered, if you want to use that term, as we continue with social distancing. These are the things that we don't know. And that really raises the fear level, what you don't know.
Correct, because obviously this started back in mid-March, and we're taping this program on Monday, April the 6th, and as you said, I think most of these closures are probably going to extend at least through the end of April, and maybe even a lot longer than that.
Well, I think we know they're going to extend through April. Will they go into May? Most experts are sort of leaning that way. Whether they're willing to go so far as to make that prediction, I don't know.
So let's look at the timeline. Obviously, we saw the mass closures basically starting to be enforced in mid-March. And you mentioned to me at the top, the first act that was really passed was the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, and really that act protecting some employee rights.
Well, yeah, and that's an act that I think was an immediate response to try to deal with those persons that were exposed to the virus, that maybe had contracted the virus, their family members. What do we do with these people if they don't have family medical leave provided by their employer? Well, that act was designed to require the employer to provide family medical leave, paid leave, for up to 2 weeks or 80 hours, depending on whether it's a full-time, part-time person. and also to provide incentives for the employer who is required to provide the benefit for tax deductions. So think of it this way: if you're employed and you contract this virus, you're going to be entitled to 2 weeks of paid time off, provided your employer's business is up and running.
Because you're going to be out of commission for 2 weeks regardless. Due to the quarantine.
Right. So for that 2 week period, you're going to get paid. Now, of course, this will not apply if your employer has been forced to shut down. In that case, it will not apply. But if your employer is operating, and it's a qualified employer, under 500 employees, then you're going to be entitled to that benefit if you meet one of the qualifications. There are basically 3 qualifications. One, that you're subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine, or 2, a healthcare provider has quarantined you because of the coronavirus, or 3, you're experiencing symptoms and have sought medical care.
Now, would this also take into effect if you ended up having contact with somebody who had coronavirus and you wanted to more or less self-quarantine at the risk of possibly exposing your fellow coworkers?
Not necessarily. It's going to require some medical.
Okay.
The way I read it,
okay,
it's going to require a medical professional to say you need a quarantine.
Okay.
And again, this is only going to apply if your employer is operational. If your employer has had to close down and they've shut their doors, it's not going to apply. At least the way I read the act.
So let's go back and look at the nuts and bolts of this whole issue then. So basically, if the business is still operational, you're going to be entitled to the benefits. But if the business is closed down because the federal government, like we see many of the mom and pop small businesses around the area, due to some of the governor's orders, has closed you down, then what are the options? To basically go on unemployment in that case?
Well, that is an option.
Okay.
There are others. And of course, we can talk a little bit about the unemployment. The way the new act that has revised the unemployment under this pandemic, there's no waiting period.
Okay.
There's going to be an extra $600 per week with your unemployment benefit, your standard benefit. The only problem is no one knows when that $600 will be made payable. We don't know when that check's coming.
Now, will those checks possibly be retroactive as well? If you were laid off or starting to collect unemployment in mid-March, and now we're going into mid-April, will that extra $600 apply per paycheck, or is that a one-time payment?
No, it'll apply when it takes effect, but I don't think mid-March would be the application date. And I don't know, and I'd have to look at my notes, but let me take a look, because I do think that they will pay them retroactively, provided you meet the proper target date.
And I think one of the things we've seen, whether it's the unemployment site, we're going to talk a lot about the PPP program as well, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, but we've seen certainly a lot of traffic on all of these sites, whether it's the unemployment compensation site, the PPP site. There are so many folks being affected, whether it's unemployment, applying for some of these loans and grants that are out there, that sometimes a lot of this is taking a while to happen just because of the amount of traffic that's on these sites.
Well, it's unprecedented. And as a result of that, these sites are crashing. You don't have enough people working in unemployment for the state to process claims. So it's very, very difficult. And again, when I use the term unprecedented, I mean it's far beyond anything we've ever had to deal with as a nation.
Yeah, if you even go back to a month and a half ago, if we would have had the same conversation talking about this happening, I think both of us would say nothing like this is ever going to happen around here. And here we are just, in early April and trying to go through and process everything that's happened here over the last couple of weeks.
And you can only imagine that no one could have predicted it. And by the time they could predict it, it was overwhelming.
Now, what are you telling your clients back to the unemployment situation right now? What's the best way, if you've been laid off, to go and try to initially get unemployment benefits?
I tell them this. I tell them, go and apply right away. Do whatever it takes. Stay on, keep going, keep trying, go online and get it done. I know that many of them are reaching out to their local legislators, local state senators, and whose offices are helping them. I tell them, keep applying. I also tell them that depending on their income, there is the possibility of additional payments. The $1,200 per person payment that would come from the federal government. If they haven't filed a tax return, file it, have direct deposit, so that that check can be directly deposited. There's a good chance those checks will be becoming available within the next few weeks, based upon all the information that's been made available. So that would help them as well.
Now, as far as the direct deposit goes, let's say I filed my federal income tax the last couple of years and I've owed money, so they don't have my routing number. Is there a way to go online and get that account information uploaded so you can get that check deposited instead of having to worry about weeks on weeks passing by before getting that money?
There are ways that you can do that, but whether or not that's going to result in a payment within the next few weeks, I don't think anyone can tell you that.
Yeah, certainly a lot of unknown questions out there. And we talked first about the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, and then, of course, a week ago Friday, the next act that was passed was the CARES Act.
Well, I think the CARES Act is an act that could have an immediate impact. And the reason I say that is because the CARES Act, through the Small Business Administration, it's going to provide loans to small businesses so they can keep their employees on the payroll.
And I think that's really key.
That's critical. And why is it critical? Well, first of all, it's going to take some of the pressure off of these unemployment claims. You take a small business person who has 5 or 6 employees, if he can continue to pay them, and even if they're not maybe working 40 hours, but they're getting paid for 40 hours, if he can continue that process, then that's going to be, it's going to keep them in a position where they can meet their obligations. It's going to, they're still going to be paying taxes, they're still going to be paying into Social Security and the various other benefits. So it's going to be very important for the overall economy. Now, the way this works is, the small business person, he or she applies for a loan through a qualified bank, and if that loan is approved, 75% of that money is going to have to be used to pay payroll.
That's over an 8-week period.
Over an 8-week period. And you have to be committed to keeping these people on your payroll moving into the future.
If you want to get that 100%, I think if you would reduce the payroll, then it would still be retroactive, but you want to try to stay at that 100% level.
Well, it's April 3rd is the date that you could have applied. April 10th for people that we'll call, say, in the gig economy or the self-employed. But think of it this way. If you borrow that money and you follow the guidelines and use it for the purposes that it's designed, then that loan can be forgiven. So it becomes a direct benefit to the employer, through the employer to the employee.
Basically, the loan becomes a grant, and I think once you get past June 30th, as long as you show that your payroll is consistent and you're using the other 25% to pay utilities or rent payments.
Rent, mortgages, yes. The way it's designed now, only 25% can be used for those other purposes. 75% has to be used for payroll. That's what we're projecting.
And I think for the most part, as far as the application process itself, and I work directly with it, it seemed pretty easy to file and work with your local bank, even though there were some changes, to at least get that information to the banks. And now, obviously, I think the banks are trying to sort through the whole computer system and trying to get everything processed at this time. But I think as far as from a small business perspective, once they got that final version in on April the 3rd, for the most part, it was pretty clear cut.
Well, I think that's true. I think the information that they wanted was fairly clear cut, but the Department of Treasury, the Small Business Administration, they kept on tweaking the application. Yeah. So what had happened is many small businesses had to submit maybe 4 or 5 applications until the final document was there for the bank to submit to the SBA. Now what happens is, if the SBA approves that loan, then the bank makes the loan.
Correct.
And there's no fee to the small business person. He doesn't pay any fee, he or she. The bank is paid through the Department of Treasury by way of the SBA. They get a commission on the loan, depending on the size of the loan. I think it's 4%.
So it certainly helps the bank out as well, and it's certainly helping all the small business out too.
Well, it helps the bank out in a number of ways. One, there's a fee that they can make to keep operational. Of course, they need to make that fee to keep the bank operating, and at the level that it's operating now. And also, it guarantees the payment. The SBA is guaranteeing the payment.
And I think that was the one big question a lot of the banks had last week before we got a final version of this. They wanted to make sure they were going to get their money as well.
Well, of course, they want to make sure they were going to guarantee the payment, because they're not requiring collateral to be posted by the small business person. Now, it doesn't mean that many of these loans aren't going to be repaid. And many small businessmen are actually applying for these loans knowing that they may not be able to meet the qualifications for the grant. But the interest rate is so favorable, and it's going to get them through this period, that they're not that concerned about it. And particularly those employing greater numbers of people.
Yeah, because this is basically a lifeline, I think, for a lot of small businesses right now at this point, because we've seen, as we talked about earlier, how the economy on a whole, especially with the small businesses, has been greatly impacted by everything that's gone on here over the last couple of weeks.
Well, I mean, like I said, we use the term unprecedented. We can't look at anything else historically to compare. You can't go back to the Great Depression and compare to what's happening to us today. Now, does that necessarily mean we're going to, in the future, we'll experience a depression? It may. We don't know that because, again, it's all so unprecedented. But in the way this CARES Act works, it's going to get money into the employees' hands. It's going to keep the businesses running if it works, and I think it will. And and when we do come out of this, the business is not going to have a long lag till it maybe gets back to the place that it had been before all of this pandemic occurred.
Using your professional opinion, if someone applies today for a PPP loan that's going to become a grant, when do you think they could expect to see this money?
You know what? That's a question I've asked every banker that I've talked to, and I've asked them all, and they've all been so gracious and so helpful, but none of them can say for sure. You know, if you listen to the Treasury and Treasurer Mnuchin, you get the feeling it's going to happen soon.
Yeah.
I mean, literally within the next week.
And they were saying that this past Friday we were going to actually start to see some check payments, and you said maybe not locally, but you've heard that around the country some folks have gotten paid already.
I have heard that banks have been approved, the loans have been approved, and banks have funded them. The question then is, where, in what order are these going to occur? Obviously, if you have a relationship with a bank and a banker, you're going to be on the front end of this.
And I think that's the key as well. If you're going to apply for one of these loans, they're encouraging you to apply, assuming that the bank that you use for your regular banking is taking part in this program, to go through that local bank, because I think that's going to expedite this program as much as possible.
Well, absolutely. Think of it this way. That bank has all of your information already. They have your financial statements. They probably have a good idea what your payroll is. They probably have much of the information that is going to make up the application. Now, obviously, you've got to put it in, but it's going to give the bank a good sense of security and a good sense of who you are.
And a lot of that information available on the SBA website. I know Jerry and Mr. Schiffbauer, they're going to post some of that information up on the South Union Township website as well, if you'd like to take a look at that. And I know you and Davis always willing to help folks out as well as much as you can.
Oh, we are. And I said, we've been reaching, and there's a disclaimer here. I have to defer to my friends in the banking industry, who I feel are further ahead on this thing than certainly I am. And I go to them for advice as well. But I think all of the various websites that are out there, the SBA, the Department of Treasury, these can really help the small businessman. And also the people who are experiencing a lot of economic problems, be it if they're laid off. The Department of Labor, the Pennsylvania Department of Labor website. If you're laid off, go there, look at that. There's some things that can give you some help. So that's what I would suggest. But all of these websites provide information, and they're being updated constantly.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. Yeah. They've been really good, depending on what agency you're looking at. I think most of them have been refreshed pretty quickly. Anytime new information gets out there, it's posted pretty quickly.
I mean, when you think about it, this is the CARES Act, $2 trillion of stimulus. To me, it's hard to get your mind around that. Now, but then when you think about it, and here we are just here in Fayette County, when I talk to businessmen, how many of them are applying for these loans? And I think to myself, all over the United States.
They're happening everywhere.
Everywhere. So that's why it's so important to get in touch with that bank, get online, submit that application, because that $2 trillion is going to run out pretty quickly.
For sure. I think that's what everybody's trying to get.
Only $350 billion are going to be utilized for the payroll protection.
Correct. And we're going to get more on the CARES Act with Jim Davis from Davis & Davis, Attorneys at Law, joining us here on Inside South Union Township, here on the South Union Township Network. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
Davis & Davis, Attorneys at Law.
Every person who's been injured, when they come in, has an expectation that their case is important, and it is to us. We take these cases very seriously.
So that experience that we have is unique also because we have experience in these communities, in Uniontown, in Washington, in Waynesburg, in these court systems.
You don't have to go to Pittsburgh to be represented by attorneys who don't know their way around your community.
Davis & Davis, Attorneys at Law.
Welcome back to Inside South Union Township here on the South Union Township Network. Brian Morozak being joined by Jim Davis from Davis & Davis Attorneys at Law, talking about the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic. And this is a series of programs we've been bringing you here on the South Union Township Network, and all of our programs archived on YouTube as well at youtube.com/South Union TV. And we also have all of our program updates on Facebook as well, facebook.com/South Union TV, and the Atlantic Broadband Channel 17 cable network, along with Armstrong Channel 61, airing all of these programs on a loop. So if you have an opportunity, you missed any of the programs and don't have access online to take a look at the programs, you could check out Atlantic Broadband Channel 17 or Armstrong Channel 61. And we're talking about the CARES Act, and we mentioned the Payroll Protection Program, the PPP, but a lot more than just the PPP is part of this CARES Act, Mr. Davis.
Oh yes, there's a lot more to it, and as I said, a lot of it we're still trying to digest.
Correct.
And we're still kind of receiving guidance from the Department of Treasury, the Small Business Administration, various banking institutions, and I suspect that's going to go on for a while.
And the second part of that was the economic injury disaster loan. We were actually talking during the break. You had sent me a copy of the application for this program earlier on this morning, and it's changed since then.
Yes, the one I actually changed, they actually changed. Now, it was a subtle change, but you still, for those businesses that had applied for the payroll protection, would have probably had to refill it out and submit it again before we go to the Small Business Administration.
So let's talk about the nuts and bolts here of the EIDL.
Well, that is a $10,000 loan designed to ease the impact of this disaster. It's part of the CARES Act. It's under that umbrella. It's different from the $350 million payroll protection program that we have been talking about. And I would recommend, you can do it online. It's a very simple application. Apply. I don't want to sit here and go through all the businesses that may or may not be qualified for that loan, but it just seems to me, if you're a small business and you're struggling, and you know you're going to struggle because of what's going on, then it makes sense to me that you'll apply for that loan.
And you basically have to show that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected your business from an economic standpoint in a negative way.
Absolutely, and very few businesses would have any problem demonstrating that.
Now, we saw from the PPP that loan will have a good opportunity through payroll, through the whole payroll process to end up getting forgiven. Is that true here with the EIDL?
My understanding is yes.
Okay.
Okay, and again, another disclaimer. No one knows for sure.
Okay.
I'm certainly not an expert, but my understanding is yes. Now, there may be a set-off if you get the payroll protection benefits. I kind of suspect that there will be, but that's a completely different process, and I would recommend that you do that as well.
So you would say apply for both.
Absolutely.
Both line years right now.
My philosophy would be definitely apply for the payroll protection, thinking about how you want to keep your employees with you. You want to keep them as part of your team. And I know most employers feel that way. I mean, especially the small business person. They have relationships with their employer, with their employees. They want to keep them working. They want to keep them financially sound. They want to make sure they can make their mortgage payment and their car payment, and they can pay for their kids' education. So what you want to do, you want to apply for that loan, and hopefully you can pass that on, because it's going to give you 8 weeks of payroll.
Yeah, and that's only 75% of it. You can
Yeah.
also get the,
And you can that's 75%.
Correct.
And you also can get reimbursed for a mortgage payment, rent, utilities. So
it all adds up. And I think that's going to be huge for these businesses down the road, because again, we don't know how long the economic impact of this whole pandemic is going to be, but to have that initial cash payment put in your account is going to help, I think, these businesses for a long time down the road.
And like we were talking about before the break, there's an excellent opportunity for this to be forgiven, for it to become, as you call it, a grant. But there's also the other side of that coin. To the extent that it isn't, the interest rates are very favorable, and the employer can he or she can keep their business afloat, keep their employees employed with them, so that when this thing breaks and we get back to normal, which we will, we're going to get back to normal. We just don't know when. When we do, you're going to have your employees there. They're going to be grateful that they were able to help withstand this storm, so to speak, this terrible storm, and get back to business.
And I think an important part of what you said, too, especially from a small business standpoint, treating your employees like family, I think is very key. And if you're able to go out and keep them on payroll and not lay them off and create that extra uncertainty out there, I think really says a lot for you as a small business as well.
Well, I was talking to one of my clients who is he's just a wonderful businessman, and he said to me, Jim, the guys that work for me are at risk. I think I want to lay them off. I don't want them to take any greater risk. He said, but if I can get this loan, I want to pay them, because I want to make sure when this is over, when we've gotten through this, that they're there for me, because I want to be there for them. They've been working for me. They are like my family. Our business can't go on without them. They're an integral part of our business. Just as the owner is an integral part of the business, so is that employee.
For sure.
Yes.
It's nice to have those employees that have
Yeah.
been there forever and
Yeah.
taking care of you, and being able to help them out as well at a time of need. And we also mentioned there's going to be some business tax changes and some employee retention credit as well. Now, unlike the emergency disaster loan and the PPP, there's a good chance that if you apply for and get the payroll protection program, that some of these employee retention tax credits you might not qualify for.
I would think you won't qualify.
Okay.
The way I'm approaching it from the people I've spoken with, apply for the payroll protection. If you're successful, you get it, and things are moving, then take a look at these various tax credits that you might be eligible for, and maybe take a look at them. If you fail to qualify for payroll protection, then obviously you want to apply for those.
Let's talk about some of these employee retention credits, talk about the nuts and bolts of some of these other programs. In a nutshell, what are these retention credits providing?
Well, and again, this is one of the areas that I'm still not 100% comfortable with.
Okay.
And I say that because we haven't, in our firm, most people that are calling us on payroll protection issues, things like that. We're deferring to the accountants, the CPAs on the tax credit side.
And we're actually going to try to get some CPAs and some banking experts on a future program here on Inside South Union Township.
But think of it this way. Think of it like you might think of the Family First medical leave. It's similar, where there's going to be a benefit out there, but you're going to be able to recoup the cost through a credit or a tax deduction. That's basically what we're talking about.
And that's obviously keeping employees on your payroll.
Right. And that's the whole philosophy behind these various pieces of legislation, is to try to maintain, to the extent possible, business as usual. And when you can't, to try to give a cushion to that employee who's lost his job and has been laid off.
Anything else you'd like to add on the CARES Act before we move on to talk a little more about unemployment compensation and some of the economic impact payments as well?
Well, I think of, when I think of the CARES Act, to me it's a no-brainer, the CARES Act. The only other thing I've added, and I think it bears repeating, is time is of the essence, because there's not that much money available, and the sooner you apply, the more likely that that you're going to be approved, and the more likely you're going to be able to utilize these funds to help your people.
And again, you have until, I think, June 30th to apply for the PPP, but as you said, you want to try to get on this right away, because we're seeing another deadline coming up on April the 10th, as you said, for some of the independent contractors to hop on board the program. And I think the deeper and deeper we get into this, the money's going to start drying up.
Well, the self-employed they can't apply till the 10th.
Correct.
And then that's going to include the gig economy, which, we don't think about that, but there are quite a few people who are self-employed in our economy. And I think that the numbers are always increasing. Remember now, on April 3rd, everybody was applying that are small businessmen. So already, the self-employed are going to be a little bit behind.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. We mentioned unemployment benefits a little bit earlier, but I think important to recap, because I think this is impacting so many folks out there. We've seen some of the early unemployment numbers come up here in Pennsylvania and nationwide as well, and really astronomical what we're seeing as far as, I think, what we're going to see the unemployment rate end up jumping up to here in a couple of weeks once all that data ends up getting processed. I think probably more now than any other time in our lifetime, folks applying for unemployment benefits.
Any other time in history. It's my understanding that you're having more applications and a greater percentage of people that will be eligible for unemployment benefits than ever before in the history of the country, including the Great Depression. This is what I understand. And if there's some people out there that are historians, maybe they can enlighten us in the future. But the way, some of the important changes in the Unemployment Act, no waiting period, no work search requirement, benefits are going to be extended beyond 26 weeks. There's going to be 50% of your wages up to $573 plus $600 per week add-on.
That's $600 per week.
Per week.
Which is very important. And again,
and that's until July.
Correct.
So think of that at about a 2-month or so period. It's going to April, May. Well, it could actually be 3 months.
It can end up being an extra $5,000 to $7,500, depending on how this whole thing gets shaken out. That you have an opportunity of getting to kind of hold you over through this time.
Yeah, and again, the problem with this program, as I see it, is the ability to process claims, the ability to respond to claims, and also when will the $600 additional be paid.
And if that's going to be paid retroactively as well from when this whole pandemic started back in mid-March.
I'm going to assume on the date on the date that they revise the unemployment laws, that they will
put that back retroactively.
Yeah, that's an assumption I think most are making.
And again, the unemployment website, uc.pa.gov, probably the best way to apply for your unemployment benefits. I know, talking to a lot of the folks who have tried to call in, they've had limited success or very long hold times just because of the number of people applying for unemployment compensation benefits.
You got to feel for people who are in this situation, so many of them, and they're all trying to, make ends meet. My advice is similar to yours, exactly the same as yours. Get online, apply if you can, do whatever you can. And again, reach out to your various state representatives. I know they've been helpful.
You had a note in here as well about workers' compensation benefits. Anything you'd like to add as far as that goes and ties into the whole unemployment claims?
Well, if you've been exposed in your workplace, you may in fact be eligible for workers' compensation benefits as a result of the coronavirus. These are issues that are yet to be determined. The employer can file a disease injury claim. Evidence of exposure is going to be complicated. So these are things that I think should be considered if you have been exposed in the workplace. And this is going to be very important to the healthcare workers and people on the front lines. People that are the ambulance people, the first responders. So yeah, I would be looking at it.
I think even folks that might work in a big call center, for instance, or somewhere where you're going to have employees that are closely exposed or were closely exposed, and might have 500 to 1,000 people in a certain area.
This is an occupational disease under the Pennsylvania Workers' Compensation Statute. Now that's an area you and I can talk a while about that. I can talk about workers' comp because I do a lot of that work, as you know. But yes, if you've been exposed, it's something that you want to take a look at. Again, these are not, causes are very complicated. And as we know, this virus is extremely complicated. It's so complicated that you have so many different views from medical professionals. But I do think it's worth considering and looking into.
And our final point here, as far as some of the economic impacts of this whole coronavirus pandemic, the economic impact payments. Of course, I think everybody by now knows about the $1,200 that most of us will be expecting as long as we fall under the certain income requirements here over the next couple of weeks. And I think important to really go over some of these payments, what you might see if you have some children out there as well for your whole family, and what some of those economic impact and what some of those economic limits are right now.
Well, you have $1,200 per individual, $2,400 per married couple, and $500 for each qualifying child. There's no action required. The distribution should begin in the next couple weeks. Now, no one knows for sure. We'd like to think it's going to be next week, but we don't know that.
And again, if you have direct deposit, you're more likely going to see that check.
If you have filed a tax return, your direct deposit, you're more likely to see it within the next few weeks. If not, you're hearing all kind of horror stories.
Okay.
You just don't know. It's for tax filers, individual, adjusted gross income of $75,000, married couples, $150,000. Now, if you're over those numbers, it's going to be reduced by $5 for each $100 above the $75,000 and $150,000 threshold.
Now, is that going to be taxable income?
My understanding is, and again, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to assume no.
Okay.
I'm going to assume it's not going to be taxable income. Go to IRS.gov/coronavirus. That's where you'll get more information on this. But I do think what I like about this program is anybody in these income levels can get this money now, and most people are going to need it. They're going to need it because they're not working. If they are working, they're working less hours. They may not be eligible for unemployment yet because of their hours worked, or they may be eligible, but they're going to be waiting, even though because of the crashing sites and all the bureaucratic mess, because our bureaucracy's never seen anything like this.
I think it's also going to help, too, down the road when some of these small businesses start to reopen, as far as a little stimulus. Maybe you waited a while to buy that furniture that you wanted to buy, and local furniture store's been closed for a couple of weeks.
You're going out to eat, you're going to the movies, whatever.
Wherever you're going, all these places that you wanted to go over the last couple of weeks, or had ideas as far as you want to buy that new car, and the car dealership's been closed, whatever is on your plate as far as things you might want to do over the next couple of weeks. Now you have an opportunity to do that. You have that money in your back pocket now when those businesses finally reopen.
Yeah, I agree. I think and again, hats off to our government that has really had to struggle to try to come up with some solutions to this monumental problem. First on the healthcare side, and then on the economic side that is a result of that.
Again, we'll have all these websites posted up on the South Union Township website and also on our YouTube page as well if you want to take a look and get an idea as far as where you need to go depending on what area you're looking into as well. Jim, it's been great information here that you passed along to us. Anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
Well, first of all, let me thank you. You know what? You've been great. I'm real happy.
Always enjoyed working with you.
Yeah, I've been happy. I know you and I have talked at the radio station and such, and I've enjoyed speaking with you today. My disclaimer goes on. There's a lot of information out there I want people to maybe take from this interview, go out and do some research, talk to their banker and other people that might have more information than I do. I do think it's important to thank South Union Township supervisors, Robert Schiffbauer, Rick Vernon, Jason Scott, for all that they do. I do want to thank Cal U President, a good friend of mine, Geraldine Jones. I think Cal U TV has been very supportive of everything that the supervisors here are trying to do with these informative broadcasts, and it's just been my pleasure to play a small role.
And again, California University have put all these broadcasts up on a loop right now, so if you missed our program, it's going to be airing again shortly. This is a number of a series of programs that we've been putting on here on California University Channel 61, Atlantic Broadband Channel 17, and again, all of the broadcasts available on demand on the South Union Township YouTube page as well. Jim, enjoyed it?
I've loved it. Thank you.
That's Jim Davis from Davis & Davis. Attorneys Outlaw joining us here on Inside South Union Township, which has been a joint cooperative venture featuring Township Supervisors Bob Schiff Bauer, Rick Vernon, and Jason Scott, Atlantic Broadband Cable, Armstrong Cable, and our friends at CUTV, including Gary Smith. For Jim Davis and Jerry Dupay, behind the camera, this is Brian Morozak. Stay safe out there and have a great day.